I'm going to skip ahead a little bit now and try test fitting this part of the valve gear. I secretly joined together the radius rod, the combination lever and the union link, but don't worry, I will take them to bits again and show you how to put them together. But before we get into assembling the valve gear properly, I'm still worrying about the clearance behind this valve-spindle crosshead guide. These castings weren't made for this particular kit, and so it may be necessary to make some more adaptations to them before everything will work. So at the back end of this radius rod there's a 0.5mm hole, and I need to thread this over the pivot pin that I installed into the motion bracket in the last part. And once that's secure, it's going to hold the radius rod at the correct position so I can investigate what's happening with the combination lever and how it can move inside that crosshead guide. And you can see here that the forward and back movement is restricted. Well, it's restricted in how far forward it can go because of the slot in the crosshead guide. And I'm worried that that forward movement is not going to be enough. So if I bring in the crosshead and just insert it into the slide bars temporarily, we can see how far forward and backwards this is going to need to be able to move when we put this on the chassis with the wheels. You can see what will happen eventually is that this bottom end of the union link there will join with another pivot joint to the drop link on the bottom of the crosshead. So here it is now in place on the chassis, and if we temporarily put the big end of the connecting rod over the crank pin on the centre drivers, if I can do it, we can move these round and find the extents of travel of the crosshead in the slide bars. And at the rearmost position everything looks fine, the union link stretches far enough, but we need to have a look what happens when we move this crosshead to the other end of its travel. And as I twiddle with this, it's becoming apparent that that combination lever actually needs to be able to swing a lot further forward than it's currently able to do. This is about as far forward as the crosshead would be able to move, but it needs to move a millimetre or two further forward. So we have a problem. And hindsight, of course, tells me that what I should have done was file the slots in the castings deeper before I soldered the castings into the cylinder block. But until I'd got to this point in the assembly, I had no way of knowing how deep those slots needed to be. At least it looks pretty nice from this angle, even if it doesn't work. Anyway, I shall take this bit of valve gear out again and ponder what to do about these slots. Filing them deeper is not really an option at this stage because the slide bars are in the way. I could unsolder everything and start again, but I'd really like to avoid that if at all possible. So looking down from on top, we can see the extent of the problem. This slot needs to be extended by at least a millimetre, maybe 2, and the same on the other side. One option to consider is taking a piercing saw and just cutting this top part of the casting off. I have to be very careful not to damage the slide bars doing that, but I could deepen the slots and then stick the bits back on, or even stick something else on altogether. However, there is another option open to me because I'm lucky enough to possess a milling machine and I'm feeling brave enough, or perhaps stupid enough, to attempt to mill out this slot with it in situ on the model. And this is all feeling rather precarious because to hold this I've had to clamp the cylinder block in a toolmaker's clamp, which is itself held in the milling vise. That little wobble was just my hand brushing against the camera. The clamping's not quite that precarious. But I'm feeding this very gingerly, taking little bites, making this slot deeper and also wider. I should just mention that safety glasses are mandatory for this kind of thing. So fast forward through a few more camera wobbles, and I think I've managed to complete this without destroying everything. And it's fairly easy to see what I've achieved by looking down from on top. This slot is significantly wider and significantly longer than on the left hand side, which I haven't done yet. And if I turn this sideways, it might be a little bit easier for you to see the gap that's there where the combination lever is going to swing. I'm just trying to line it up so the white line on the cutting mat is in the gap on the left hand side. You may or may not remember back in part 26 how I was struggling to get a strip of metal into the gap on the right hand side, and I'm hoping that that won't be a problem anymore. So if I turn this round the other way now and try the same trick of trying to look through the gap onto the line on the cutting mat, I can see that I've got a gap now that's about the same size on the right hand side as there previously was on the left hand side, and that one was sufficient for the combination lever to pass through. Of course, the only way to be sure is to poke a bit of metal in there and test it, and this slides in easily now, so I'm confident that this gap is going to be enough. Even if I have to joggle the combination lever a little bit, which I'm hoping I won't have to do actually, but turn it up the other way, I can see there is quite a sizable gap there. So I need to go back to the milling machine now, lengthen the slot on the left hand side, and then I can crack on with the valve gear.